Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is February 25th, 2025, 508 days after the attacks by Hamas and other militants in the south of Israel. An update of the last 24 hours. Today I had one of those days in Washington, D.C. where you hear so many things and you kind of don't know what way is up and what way is down. The Middle East is in chaos. The things that are happening in the West Bank are unseen since the past decades. And we're hearing that soldiers, Israeli military, are lining up at the Gaza border, and who knows, if fighting might just start back up again around the horizon. And yet the ceasefire continues to hold on by the thinnest of thin threads in the first phase. I might have mentioned yesterday, I sent a letter to Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, at the bequest of the Armenian Orthodox Church, who is a part of our membership, the Armenian Quarter of Jerusalem, and the Patriarchate there. The very existence of that Christian community and those lands is under threat. And that Christian community has been there for centuries, hundreds and hundreds of years. The Jerusalem municipality said that they are foreclosing on the properties of the Armenian Patriarchate in the Old City of Jerusalem. There was supposed to be a case or a proceeding today that was postponed. My understanding is it's the second proceeding. The implications of this are that the land could be sold, and the people who most want to buy the land are Israeli settler groups. I was told today that one of the dynamics at play is this whole issue of the cow's garden. If you're not familiar with the dynamics that have been happening in the Armenian Quarter and the Armenian Patriarchate, we wrote an article for Sojourners about what's happening there. But because the Armenian Church has been going to law in not selling that property in the cow's garden to the agency that's working with settler organizations, this tax issue of Arnona is being brought forward and being used to threaten to confiscate the land. If the land is confiscated, it would be sold to non-Christian communities, most likely militant Jewish settlers. This means Christians in Jerusalem are under threat. It means that the Christian community in the Holy Land is in peril and is, under threat of displacement and, the religious freedom in the city of peace, the idea of Jerusalem as a shared city where Jews can worship freely, Christians and Muslims can worship side by side freely, is literally disappearing under our watch. And so Churches for Middle East Peace is calling for an intervention. We're saying this is a threat not only to Christians in Jerusalem, but to Christians and people of any religious belief anywhere. So with that in mind, what is the role of the United States in all of this and in the Middle East? We know that the Trump administration has sent cluster bombs that arrived in Israel a couple of weeks ago. We don't really know what the Trump administration's approach is going to be. I'll talk in a minute about Iran. We heard that the U.S. might actually take part in attacking Iran with Israel. We also have heard analysts saying that Israel is set to attack nuclear sites in Iran in coming months, and the U.S. could be drawn into either a proxy war with Iran or even a direct war, and that is a real risk. Iranian-backed extremists are present in the U.S., and I was literally told today that if the U.S. supports an Israeli attack on Iran, or if the U.S. engages directly and attacks Iran, that we would see terrorist attacks all over the United States, making 9/11 look like it was insignificant. So that's the conversation I had over my morning breakfast. How was your morning this morning? It was reported in Israeli news that the U.S. and Israel might decide to strike Iran as early as this fall. That has a little bit later than some of the things I've been hearing. Former ambassador to Israel, Dan Shapiro, said that. He said it's highly likely Netanyahu and Trump will face a decision on whether or not to attack Iran as early as this year. Later on Tuesday, The Telegraph reported that Iran raised alert levels near their nuclear sites because they fear an attack. The U.S. yesterday imposed sanctions on dozens of people and oil tankers across China, the UAE, India, and other jurisdictions over alleged links to Iran oil sales, the U.S. Treasury said. And on the other hand, President Trump, I'm shifting gears away from Iran and militarism, but at the National Prayer Breakfast, Christian freedom was discussed. Now, there were many things he said at the National Prayer Breakfast that were beyond distressing, but Christian freedom and religious freedom will be used by this administration. And personally, I believe international religious freedom is very important. And there's a question of, might this be used to rally Christians in the US to stand up on behalf of Arab, Palestinian, Lebanese, Syrian, Egyptian, and other Christians throughout the Middle East to prevent further war. Jewish Christians also, that further war and conflict and violence could be prevented. We must work to stop the land confiscations of Christians, such as what is happening to the Armenians in the old city of Jerusalem. We have to work to stop the land confiscations of anyone, but particularly, our Christian community. And at Churches for Middle East Peace, we advocate for the sustainability of the church, not the supremacy of the church, but the Christian community in the Holy Land where our very faith began should be safe and secure and a light to the world. And the suffering of Christians in Palestine must be acknowledged as no different from that of their Muslim neighbors living under military occupation. A bit more news from the past 24 hours. Steve Witkoff has delayed his visit to the region. It's now scheduled to start Wednesday. The delay is believed to be based on scheduling concerns because he's involved in Russia and Ukraine, rather than a comment on his belief about the ceasefire negotiations. His trip to the Middle East is believed to now occur next week. In Syria, hundreds of participants attended the long-awaited National Dialogue Conference in Damascus yesterday and today. I had a several-hour meeting today about Syria as well. The Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces militia was not invited to the talks. You'll recall they are in the northeast of the region, or of the country, the territory in Syria. The EU yesterday began easing its energy and transport sanctions and banking restrictions on Syria in a bid to kickstart Damascus's economic recovery. I just learned today that the officials of the government, who are officially a part of the government, are no longer a part of Hayat Tahrir al-Shams. So it was said that HTS has actually been disbanded and essentially only their government officials. This was in a question of whether or not we would meet with HTS officials. And so they're officially not HTS if they're a part of the government. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu demanded the complete demilitarization of the southern Syria, which is under the control of al-Shara, the former head of HTS. In a speech to the Israeli military cadets on Sunday, Netanyahu said Israel would not allow the forces of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the Islamist group that led to the overthrow of Assad, nor the new Syrian army that is being formed to enter the area south of Damascus. We demand the complete demilitarization. He went on to say, we do not tolerate any threat to the Druze community. I just heard that the Druze community in the Golan, a portion of them formed a group and decided to declare independence. So I haven't even read about that yet. I'm sorry, I'm a bit behind. Until now, Israel had described its move to the UN-monitored demilitarized buffer zone in the Golan as a temporary measure to ensure the security of Israelis on the other side. The IDF did say that they hit command centers, weapons, and depots in South Syria. When you put together a map, if you just listen to my updates and put a pin of where Israel attacks, just listen to today's report. So Israel attacked weapons depots in South Syria. This was 2 hours ago, about 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The IDF said these military targets were containing weapons. Then the IDF forces attacked Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon's Bekaa region, citing ceasefire breaches. The activity on the site was a clear violation. So that was in Lebanon. Shifting gears to Israel, Hamas. Egypt rejected the proposal to displace Palestinian people in order to not liquidate the Palestinian cause and to avoid threatening regional national security, Cairo said in a statement today ahead of the emergency Arab League summit that is now scheduled for March 4th. Another place where the Israeli military is being readied is along the Gaza border, and this is so disconcerting. Civilian restrictions have ended in the north, and the military is getting ready along the border. They ramped up their preparedness on the front lines of Gaza amid talks of possibly returning to fighting, but not in response to a concrete threat. No changes to instructions for civilians. That was from an Israeli news source. Israel reported telling mediators on Monday that it was willing to release the 600 prisoners that were supposed to be freed on Saturday if Hamas immediately returns the 4 hostages that are supposed to be released on Thursday of this week, Ynet reported. Israel demanded that Hamas return the dead captives without performing a ceremony. And then just now tonight, this was like 6:30 or something tonight, an Israeli source said, barring any last-minute snag, the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages to be returned home will happen at the same time as the exchange of Palestinian prisoners. These would be the prisoners that were already supposed to be released. In the West Bank, I just must keep this in front of us. The West Bank has been going up in flames. Israeli tanks have been in the West Bank for the first time in 20 years. And the Israeli military has said they're going to permanently occupy areas of the north of the territory, like Jenin and the refugee camps there. Netanyahu has said they're going to stay. They, being the military, is going to stay there. Tens of thousands of Palestinians have already been displaced. This is just since January. I mean, it's only the second month of the year. You have the largest displacements of Palestinians since 1967 in the West Bank. A Nablus resident was killed and several others wounded in a confrontation in Nablus in the last 24 hours. I would invite you, if you don't know what to do, join us in DC, March 19th and 20th. It's our advocacy summit. We just announced some additional speakers. The head of Trua, Rabbi Jill Jacobs, who I've talked about Trua on these updates. She is going to be one of our speakers. We have 2 ambassadors joining us from the Palestinian Authority. Archbishop Viken Akazian of the Armenian Orthodox Church will be joining us. We have some Catholic leaders. We have so many others. Oh, and Cori Bush, the former member of Congress, who lost her seat in large part because of pressures. So may God go before us. Thank you for your support. Pray for us. We continue to pray for you, and may God go before us in the name of Christ. Amen.